Because when you think about it, a toxic person is only dangerous to us if we allow ourselves to get down in the mud with them, right? If we allow ourselves to flip our lid and drag us around. If you stay in that logical thinking portion of your brain, you're not going to get into any trouble.
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Keuilian.
Welcome back, friends. Today we're talking about a very popular topic, and that is, how do I deal with toxic behavior? Or really more of what you see online is, how do I deal with toxic people? But I don't like to put a label on people. So I'm going to say toxic behavior that people will do. And friends, toxic behavior is all around us. It's a popular topic because it's something that so many of us have to deal with. And when there's someone in your life who is demonstrating toxic behavior, it takes up a lot of space in your life and in your head. Anyone who's dealt with a very toxic relationship or toxic situation knows how draining it can be, and how, just the idea of like, if I can get some tips on how to deal with this better, it's really exciting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And just to touch back on, what are we describing as toxic behavior? And there's so many descriptions, and there's so many ways to really classify or describe toxic behavior. But essentially, we can kind of sum it up by saying it's manipulative, it's self-centered, it's either controlling or needy, and it's unpleasant and sometimes malicious. So when you're dealing with someone, you might just think like negative energy, or someone who's so draining, like an energy vampire, and just someone who's like a thorn in your side. Like, I don't want to have to deal with this person again. And we have to deal with this type of behavior in our work setting. Is probably one of the number one places where you'll find yourself having to deal with people who are, acting toxic. And it can be frustrating because in the work setting, we don't really have much power over who we interact with, right? If somebody else is working at the same company as you, or the same school, whatever setting you work in, you can't really control if you have to interface with them, and how involved or how much interaction you have to have with somebody who has these behaviors. And unfortunately, there are plenty of people who really kind of start using more toxic behavior within like an office setting, because they can find that it can kind of help them grow or help them establish a position for themselves. Another one is family settings. So with the holidays coming up, it's like we all have those couple of family members that we're not looking forward to seeing. Maybe it's a mother-in-law, maybe it's who knows, whoever it is, that sibling, that uncle, that aunt, that person who's like, we have to deal with them, and it can be overwhelming to think like, the holidays are coming, like, what am I going to do when I'm in this situation and I have to deal with their toxic behavior? So I've got some tips, and I have done some brainstorming, and I have some ideas for us today to really start preparing yourself. And again, if this is someone you have to deal with on a regular basis in your work setting, then these are going to be tips that you're going to be able to start implementing right away, and hopefully will help you to better manage your interactions with people who are really acting toxic. And then if it's just, hey, you've got this family member, you've got this person that you only have to see a few times a year, and it's coming up, hopefully this will give you some peace of mind and help you prepare a little bit better. Okay, so you might have noticed that I have a little friend here with me today, this little chimpanzee. And I want you to remember this cute little guy, because he is going to help us as we learn how to handle the toxic behavior that we encounter in our life. And there's a reason for this. So in previous episodes, I've talked about how we have 3 levels to our brain. And really, as we start to kind of understand what makes people act in such a toxic way, it helps if we start with the brain and understanding these 3 levels. And so you can do like the hand model of the brain, where we start with the brainstem, which is also called the reptilian brain. And this is where all of the amazing functions that keep us alive that we don't have to think about, like breathing and digestion and all of that. And then we work up into the middle brain, which is our limbic system. It's also called the mammalian brain. And this is where our emotions, our fight or flight, this is what I have referred to as the human animal brain. And that's why we have our fun little chimp friend here, because this limbic system is essentially like the brain of a chimpanzee. And then we get up into the higher functioning portion of the brain. And this is the very human portion of the brain. That's our neocortex. It's where we have logic and speech and all of the unique and amazing intelligence that comes with being human. So we've talked about in moments of distress and trauma, we do what we like to say is you flip your lid, which means that your frontal cortex, the amazing human part of your brain, goes offline, stops being utilized, and our limbic system or our chimp brain takes over. So there's a lot of ways that we can use this information to help us better manage ourselves. But when it comes to dealing with difficult and toxic behavior, for me, it helps by imagining and picturing that we all have this chimp. We all have this limbic system that can get activated. And when the limbic system is activated and the chimp wakes up and our thinking brain goes offline, the chimp is in charge. And the chimp is emotional, and the chimp can be toxic when we let him get out of hand and out of control. And so just going into a situation where you're going to be having to deal with somebody who's quite often toxic, I picture both of our chimps, because I'm well aware that I have one too. And most of the time, she's sleeping, but she can also wake up, right? And so just picturing as I'm interfacing with this person who has gone limbic, or their chimp is in charge, right? They're being dragged around by their chimp. Their logical frontal cortex has gone offline, and just having this visual of this chimp in front of me, number one, it's kind of funny. And then number two, I'm really thinking about my chimp, because when this person who's acting toxic towards us wakes our chimp up, right? Activates our limbic system, that's when we get into trouble, right? You know, and if you have read any articles on like, how do I deal with toxic people? One of the first things that you're going to see is remain calm, right? Don't get activated. Stay in control. And so what are they saying? Essentially what they're saying is, don't let your chimp take over, right? Stay in control of your chimp. And so what that means is stay in the thinking part of your brain. Don't get active. Don't get emotional. And I like to picture like a chimp in the mud. So if someone is being toxic, I picture them like picking up mud and like throwing it at my chimp. And if I don't let my chimp get down into the mud with them, I'm going to be fine, right? So essentially, if you don't let yourself get worked up and start like going with it, you're going to be fine. And so just having this mental picture of these two chimpanzees and this idea of like someone flipping their lid and realizing if someone is acting emotionally and they are, you know, really being toxic, demonstrating this toxic behavior, their chimp is running the show. And I love this visual. The next step is really not buying into their reality. So oftentimes when we're dealing with someone who is being very toxic, probably a lot of what they're saying or their perspective on things doesn't line up with how we see things. And sometimes it can be tempting to start arguing at the level that they're at, right? So their chimp is throwing some accusations at you, or they're just painting this picture of them as the victim, or you as, you know, someone who's just done these horrible things to them, or whatever it might be, right? When we can stay separate from their version of reality, and again, hopefully keeping your chimp asleep and letting your, that beautiful, intelligent human part of your brain run the show, and letting them know like, hey, I see your perspective, but I see things differently. And once I learned this phrase, this has helped me so much. And not just with people who are, quite often act toxic, but really with anyone who's gotten emotional and like, I'm not talking to the human part of their brain anymore. Like, I'm interfacing with their chimp, using that line, like, I see things differently. Acknowledging what they've just said, of course, like, oh, okay, I can see how you see it that way. I see things differently. And just by saying that, you're not invalidating what they're saying or what they've experienced, but you're making a line in the sand by saying like, I don't buy into that. And you don't have to buy into that. And when you're able to do that and be separate from their version of reality, it helps you to stay in that logical part of your brain. Because as soon as you go in and almost agree with their version of reality by arguing it, your chimp is going to wake up. Because our chimp wakes up, our limbic system gets activated anytime we feel threatened. And really, dealing with toxic behavior, it's almost like kryptonite to our chimp because it's very threatening. Those words that we use to describe like what is toxic behavior? Well, manipulative. Well, how do you feel when you're being manipulated or you see someone around you being manipulated? You feel threatened, right? Because you see a discrepancy between your experience and your idea of the truth and what's being said. So being manipulated wakes up the chimp, right? Unless we step in. Someone being self-centered, that's going to make you feel threatened depending on the situation, right? Someone who's trying to control you or acting like a victim and really needy, that's going to make your chimp feel threatened. So I think one of the reasons why we're so interested in toxic behavior is because there is like this, it's almost like magical power that toxic behavior has over us in waking up our chimp and in getting our logical, frontal cortex to go offline, and then we feel out of control. And I think that's why it's so maddening when you have to continuously deal with someone who acts toxically. It's because your chimp keeps waking up and, taking you for a ride. And so this is such a cool way to really conceptualize it and to start to realize that, hey, my job isn't to get their chimp to calm down. Not at all. Like, that's their business. My only job in interfacing with them is to keep my chimp asleep. And to do that, we have to use that logical part of our brain and not feel threatened. Not buying into their reality by using that beautiful phrase that I love of, I see things differently. And I don't even then tell them how I see it unless they ask. Because if they ask, well, now they've given you permission and you're not arguing, you're just stating a fact that this is how I see it. And you've already acknowledged that, like, you understand that they see it that way, and that's cool. But your two versions don't have to add up, and that's okay. Building boundaries with I statements. And so saying something like, being very direct of like, hey, I feel uncomfortable when we have conversations like this. Being direct, and when you're doing this, not doing it from the place of your chimp, not doing it when you feel emotional activation in your body, but doing it when you're still in the position of the observer and you're still in that logical part of your brain, being able to clearly draw some boundaries. And when we get activated, right, when this toxic person, let's say, barges into your office and starts verbally attacking you or accusing you of something, your chimp wakes up. And if your chimp wakes up, you're not in a position anymore to start verbally creating some boundaries, right? But if you let your chimp know, and this happens with repetition, that like, I got this, I'm going to keep you safe, right? I'm going to be able to logically deal with this, then he'll stay asleep longer, right? This is like a muscle that we build up of not engaging chimp to chimp and just being able to really almost like you might need to hide your smile because you're just picturing like this chimp having a fit in front of you. And you're realizing like, I'm not going to go there. Like I have a better relationship with my chimp. I have my limbic system under lock and I'm not going to go there with them. So part of how we build this relationship and this understanding with our chimp, so part of how our frontal cortex integrates with our limbic system and interacts with that limbic system is paying attention to your emotional needs. We feel our chimp waking up when we start to have these emotions in our body. And one of the first signs is anxiety. And when we're dealing with someone who is constantly being toxic, doing toxic things, saying toxic things, we kind of start getting like a low-grade anxiety or high-grade, depending, when we're around them, when we know we have to deal with them, right? Maybe if you see them walking down the hall towards you, you start to feel this anxiety. And what that is that is your chimp waking up. So that limbic part of your brain is like, I sense danger. I sense danger. And so that's when, for you, things can start to get worse if you hand the reins over to your chimp and you allow your chimp to then guide the interaction, right? And so building this trust and this integration with your chimp by taking care of yourself. We talk about self-care, and sometimes I think self-care is looked at as a luxury or looked at as like maybe if I have time, not really important. But I think looking at self-care as tending to your chimp and starting to notice your emotional needs before they get out of control. I have a puppy at home, a Rottweiler, and she's 8 months old now, but she's also a really good analogy for me of my limbic system because I know what I have to do to manage her, right? She has some specific basic needs, and from feeding her to taking her on a run. She's so much better behaved when she's gone on a run for the day. Doing her training time is very important. So when I know when I'm meeting her needs consistently, there's this trust that's stronger and I'm better able to manage her. And it's the same with our limbic system. It's the same with this chimp in the middle part of our brain, that when this chimp knows my needs are going to be taken care of, I'm not actually in danger. Because when you think about it, a toxic person is only dangerous to us if we allow ourselves to get down in the mud with them, right? If we allow ourselves to flip our lid and let our chimp wake up and drag us around. If you stay in that logical thinking portion of your brain, staying aware of your chimp and your chimp's needs, you're not going to get into any trouble. And so that's what's a really cool thing. As you build this trust and this understanding with this wild part of your brain, you're able to feel less and less anxiety when this person comes around because you know, I'm going to stay in control. The final thing is really limiting your exposure. And, I know that's not always possible because if you're working with them, depending on who this person is in your life, sometimes you have to see them every day and there's just no way around that. And so in those situations, really just building this trust with your limbic system, picturing it like a chimpanzee helps for you like it does for me. And I keep my little guy in my office and I look at him and I use this with my clients to just remind myself that I got to take care of this guy. I have to take care of the emotional part of my brain so that it doesn't get out of control, so that I can stay using that thinking part of my brain so that I don't flip my lid, even when I have to interface with people who are being dragged around by their chimpanzee. So I hope this helps. And, if you can limit your exposure, by all means, that's a great way to build trust with your limbic system and your chimp by letting him know and demonstrating like, hey, I'm going to keep us safe and I'm not going to put you through this if it's not necessary. I hope this was helpful for you as you deal with, people in your life who are demonstrating toxic behavior. And I think it's a great perspective too, to keep in mind that person isn't toxic. A person is acting toxic, and a person is really, what they have is an unmanaged brain, right? The emotional part of their brain, the limbic system, that chimpanzee, is really running them ragged. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's easy to have more of a sense of compassion and empathy because we all have, flipped our lid in the past. And so I think it's a healthy perspective to take, and just knowing from a growth perspective that even if someone in your life is, demonstrating toxic behavior on a regular basis, they too can learn the tools to manage their chimp, to calm their limbic system down, and to behave differently in the future. And so that's a really cool thing. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helps you. Please like and subscribe. And if you think this content would help someone in your life, please share it. So thank you so much, and I will be back next week.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Keuilian.